From the Opopco Studios in Oklahoma City, I'm Jenny Carlson. It's another Football Friday Hangout. I'm joined by a good chunk of our football coverage team. Let's see where everybody is. Let's start with OSU beat writer Kyle Fredrickson. Kyle, where are you today?
In the newsroom, one floor below where you're at right now.
Yes, getting ready to head to Waco, Texas for Oklahoma State's game against Baylor tomorrow evening. We're also joined by Jason Kersey, OU beat writer. Jason, where are you at today?
I'm at home in Norman.
All right, very good. We've got that early 11 o'clock kick, so I'm sure Jason's planning on an early bedtime tonight, right, Jason?
We'll see.
And lastly, Barry Trammell, columnist, joining us from...
The Catskills. What do you mean where from? Where do you think I am?
I don't know. We're mobile. You could be anywhere in the world. I don't know where you are. Do you want to be in the Catskills?
Not particularly. I'm probably pretty cold up there. I'm at my house. We're leaving for Waco here in about an hour and a half.
All right, very good. Well, by the way, Catskills being cold, it's also cold here in the studio. So if anybody sees my breath today, please send a blanket. I'm freezing. All right, we've got a lot to talk about. A lot of quarterback talk. Who would have thought into November we'd be talking so much about new quarterbacks, quarterback movement, but it's quarterback mania. Lots to talk about with both the Sooners and the Cowboys. And we'll squeeze in some talking about the Florida job as well as postseason play. But let's start with OSU. As I mentioned, OSU headed down to Baylor for that 6:30 kickoff in Waco tomorrow night. And Kyle, give us a little update on Daxx Garman. News midweek that he was suffering from concussion symptoms after last week's game against Texas. What do we know at this point about his availability?
Well, apparently Garman's practiced the past 2 days, and you figure that's a good sign of him playing on Saturday. But anytime that concussion symptoms are involved with kind of the climate of college football right now, you figure they're going to be real safe with him and not put him in a situation where if he gets another big hit, it could cause further damage. When we're talking about this Baylor defensive line and the issues that OSU has had with its O-line, no matter who the Cowboys are going to be playing at quarterback, there's a good chance they're going to be getting thrown to the ground quite a bit. So at this point, I would say with 2 days of practice under his belt, I think we've got to assume that Garman is likely the favorite to start. I'm not sure OSU would put him in that position where he's going to practice and then not play. But as of this point, I think there's still a possibility that we could either see Mason Rudolph or, even possibly the third-string walk-on Taylor Cornelius playing for the Cowboys on Saturday.
Well, Barry, look into the crystal ball a little bit for us. Will Mason Rudolph play? Will Taylor Cornelius play? Will Daxx Garman turn around and hand the ball off a bunch? What are we going to see on Saturday night?
Oh, I have no idea. If I had to guess, I'd guess Garman would play. If he's going to practice, I don't know why you wouldn't play him. I do think the Cowboys will take it very slow with whoever's in there. I think they will play very vanilla football. I think they'll go take their licking and try to get home, be reminiscent of the old days when an outmanned OSU team would just try to get through the day. I don't think that this team can really get a lot done in terms of challenging to win. So I just don't like their chances, no matter who's the quarterback. So I think Gundy will play it very safe.
We're joined also now by Mike Sherman, our sports editor, who is not in the studio but is able to join us. And Mike, I'll throw this question to you. I mean, we're in an era of concussions and that being such a big issue. Maybe the question should be, should Daxx Garman play? What do you say to that?
Well, I know that in that era, Jenny, there's no chance that OSU is taking any liberties or chances or any risks with Daxx Garman. It's just everybody knows a lot better these days. So if all we can conclude is that if he has indeed been practicing or been in uniform, that he must be cleared and okay to play. But still, even if he is practicing and all those other things, the question really becomes, does Mike Gundy have any positive choices here? And Barry Trammell, Barry's got a column. I don't know if you guys have referenced this already, but Barry's got a column for pregame that addresses this very issue and goes through the options that Mike Gundy has in front of him. And it's not he's not making the choice of any good options. They're all bad options. And the best option he can make, I feel like right now, is to care for his quarterback and to take extra steps to make sure that Daxx Garman remains sound and full. I'm sure they're going to do that, and that's why I think there's a decent chance that the walk-on plays.
Well, Barry, let's talk a little bit about that because we were going to get to that, but as Mike references, your pregame column and something people can check out in the pregame section tomorrow of the newspaper or on newsok.com is about the question of OSU quarterbacks, and we have actually a question on newsok.com/live that relates to this and probably will be something you get into. Cowboys Rule Chris says, hey, isn't Taylor Cornelius going to play? Please don't burn Mason Rudolph's red shirt in a game that I think a lot of people expect Baylor was going to win anyway. How do you balance all of this, Barry?
Well, like the boss said, it's a difficult question, and here's the way I see it. There's not a good answer. If I personally would not play Mason Rudolph, I don't think it gets you anywhere in terms of victory, and I also think it puts him in peril, both confidence and physical. I think he's going to be under assault. He might not do much more than just hand off as well. However, what if you're James Castleman? What if you're Daniel Koenig? You've been a solid senior, been part of a lot of great wins, helped build this program into something really good, and then you get to the end of the season, and basically your team tells you, you know what, we have no chance, we're not even going to try to win. I think it's a bad message. I also think another reason to play Mason Rudolph is this. Often in today's football, guys don't play 4 full years anyway in a row. You got the NFL draft. You got guys transferring. You got guys injured. Look, if J.W. Walsh had played as a true freshman, there was no reason for him to. But if he had, he would be eligible for a redshirt freshman, a redshirt medical eligibility this season. So a lot of factors come into play. I wouldn't play Mason Rudolph just to protect Mason Rudolph. But I think there's also a lot of reasons to play him. It's a very difficult decision for Mike Gundy.
Well, Kyle, we'll let you have the last word on this. Should Mason Rudolph play? You've talked to his high school coach. Obviously, Rudolph himself off limits to the media as a first-year player, as a quarterback, so we haven't had a chance to talk to him. But you've talked to his coach previously. His coach has said that Rudolph wanted to get in there this year. If he has a chance now, should he play? Would he want to play at this point?
You know, you would figure that he would want to play, you know, being a competitor, the soonest that he can prove himself in this offense and that he's the guy. You know, let's say he does play against Baylor and OU, and even if the Cowboys lose those games, which they probably are going to, if he plays well, it sets up in a nice situation for him going into spring kind of being the guy. But when we really look at this from a broad sense and in a broad point of view, I don't think they should play him, and for a lot of the reasons that Barry had said, but also you just want to keep this guy healthy. I mean, when you have a young quarterback back like this that you're developing in the system, you're going to throw him in against Baylor and OU, that, you know, teams that are going to rush the passer. With this kind of offensive line, you're asking for trouble and you're asking for a potential injury. And at this point, that would be the worst thing for Mason Rudolph, to maybe have to go through an injury in his first couple games, and you wonder how that affects his psyche. You know, we can look back to Wes Lunt and maybe talk about how those early injuries impacted his career down the line and his confidence in the pocket and everything that goes into being a good quarterback. So, you know, like Barry had mentioned, you worry about losing the locker room a little bit by starting a walk-on, you know, over the guy who's number 2 on your depth chart. But you got to look to the long-term future of the program. And if Mason Rudolph's your guy, you guys got to be so careful with how you're going to use him.
Yeah, lots of questions, and I guess we'll have to wait and see Saturday evening, that 6:30 kick again, and see who does start at quarterback for the Cowboys. As Barry mentioned, probably not good options all the way around. Let's turn our attention to OU, where quarterbacks are also a question. Let's bring Jason Kersey into the discussion. Sooners hosting Kansas, an 11 o'clock start on Saturday. And Jason, I think the first question that people want to know is about Trevor Knight. You and Ryan Aber have written about him and this situation with this transient quadriplegia, which sounds awful, frankly, and I think probably was for Trevor Knight and probably continues to be. The big question is Trevor Knight done at quarterback? Might we never see him play another snap at quarterback for the Sooners?
Well, I think that's possible. I think that with this injury, that's always a possibility. It's an extremely scary thing. Even if physically he's fine, I was saying the other day that, if I became temporarily paralyzed from doing something, even if I was told I was fine, I may never want to do that again. I just can't imagine what that would feel like. So, but from everything that I've been told by people who know, it's that there was no spinal stenosis, which if the transient quadriplegic causes that, at that point you can't play anymore. And there's been no structural damage to his spine. So from that regard, he should be able to play again. Now, will he play again? I have no idea. And I don't think anybody knows at this point.
Yeah, a couple of things that Trevor Knight has mentioned on his Twitter account, different activities around campus. So I get the feeling, and I'm sure that, things that Jason and Ryan have been told backs this up, but he is functioning, he's around, he's, not having to be holed up somewhere in a bed. So that's good news, and we know from the day of the injury, that day of the Baylor game, that he did leave the football facility under his own power, was talking to teammates after the game, walking around the locker room in some pain, no doubt, but was, operating under his own power. So that's good news. But obviously part of this equation, and let's bring Mike into the discussion here, part of this equation is Cody Thomas and how well he played at Texas Tech last week. Mike, how does that factor into Trevor Knight's future as a quarterback for the Sooners?
Well, a couple ways, Jenny. I mean, one is the competitor. Let's talk about Trevor Knight, the competitor, for a second. And this is a guy who took down, who upset Blake Bell to win the starting quarterback job way back when, at the beginning of last year. I think we all thought this was a procession and that Landry Jones was going to hand it off to the Belldozer. And lo and behold, Trevor Knight won. An upset to outsiders, maybe not the folks who are watching, as Jason and others wrote about, those Cotton Bowl scout team, Johnny Manziel imitations, but an upset to the rest of us. So he's a competitor. Number two, from the coach's standpoint, they have Cody Thomas has bought Bob Stoops, Josh Heupel some time. They can be extra cautious here. And so that's a luxury that maybe OU didn't think it had going into this season. Of course, Jason, didn't Sonny Galloway tell you all along that Cody Thomas was going to be the quarterback? Wasn't that his prediction?
He told me a lot of things.
Okay. All right.
Hey, there's a question before the court. Answer the question.
Yes, he did say that.
So give Sonny credit. You got to give Sonny credit when he says it.
Maybe he's a better football evaluator than baseball evaluator.
What he said was that Cody was going to come in as a true freshman and just jump over Bell and Knight and Kendall Thompson right away. So he was wrong in that regard.
Well,
all right.
I mean, he was right about the talent. How did he know that Bob Stoops and Mike and Josh Heupel were going to suppress Cody Thomas's obvious athletic superiority? That sort of takes this serious topic, though, into a fun direction. We need a lot of fun around here, Jenny, these days when we're talking about college football and even the local NBA team. But one last thing about Cody Thomas and Trevor Knight is just think about how we're talking about this. And if we got in the Wayback Machine and went back 3 seasons even, maybe 2 seasons, how the tone and tenor of our conversation would have changed. We'd be talking about Daxx Garman as a competitor. Look at him. He got up and, there's this report that he practiced this week in spite of all those hits. What a competitor. That's the kind of leader that really shows and takes a team and puts it on his back. And, kudos to him. And, what's Trevor Knight? When is he going to get back in? Come on, Trevor Knight. If you're a leader, this is kind of opportunity that you get to show that you're a leader. My, oh my, how things have changed. And we are all enlightened. Now we err on the side of caution, which is really the way I think Bob Stoops and company are going to err. There's a good chance that Trevor Knight won't quarterback anymore in this calendar year.
Yeah, I think a very good chance of that. Jason and Ryan have both mentioned as much. And Barry, let's turn to this. And Jason, this is something you've also discussed, so we'll get you in here in just a second. But the question of Cody Thomas, maybe it comes down to he's a better quarterback than Trevor Knight. Is that a possibility, Barry?
Well, I don't think he is now, but I think it's quite possible that he's better suited for this offense OU's been running than Trevor is. Not because he's a better passer, but because he's a better and more efficient runner and executor of the option. I mean, your man Samaje Perine talked about this week. He said, Cody Thomas hangs on to the ball about a half second longer than Trevor. Mm-hmm. A half second is an eternity in option football. That's the difference between knowing whether an end's crashing or whether he's not. So, I didn't really put it in those terms when I saw him play the other day, but out in Lubbock. But I could tell that he was just much more efficient. The option was much more fluid with Cody Thomas. He's not as fast as Trevor Knight, but he's more of a instinctual runner. So I just think he might be better suited for this offense than is Trevor Knight.
Well, Jason, you referred to this earlier this week on one of our OU Update videos about Josh Heupel and his comments post-practice on Monday and how shocking they were that there was no for sure dedication to Trevor Knight being the quarterback if he was healthy, and how shocking that was to you and a lot of other people. So how does Cody Thomas and his abilities play into all of this?
Well, I mean, he threw 3 interceptions in the first half the other night in Lubbock against a bad defense. But what I will say about that is it was his first start. That's a really hostile environment, and it was a windy day. So I think that all plays into that. I think there's a really good chance that he is or will be a better quarterback than Trevor Knight very soon. Just because I do think he throws the ball better than Trevor Knight. I think he sees the field better than Trevor Knight. He's taller. I think his arm is better than Trevor Knight's. And like Barry just said, I think he runs better than Trevor Knight does. At least he may not be as fast, but he's maybe a more efficient runner. So, I mean, there's no reason to believe that he couldn't be the starting quarterback next year. And then you're also going to – this spring's going to be really interesting because you're also going to introduce Baker Mayfield into the mix. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I never would have thought we'd be having this conversation in November. Only 10, 11 months ago, Trevor Knight was the Sugar Bowl MVP, the toast of the town, and he's been made a team captain. And I don't think anybody could have fathomed that we'd be talking about this at this point.
Well, lots has changed, and clearly that might be reflected in the crowd tomorrow. I want to get to that in just a minute, but I want to remind people that you're watching the Football Friday Hangout here from the Pubco Studios. You can join us at newsok.com/live. Throw in your questions. We've already gotten to a couple of those, and we'll try to get to a couple more. But Jason, let's have you talk a little bit about what you're writing about for the pregame. We had Barry reflect on his OSU angle a little bit earlier, but you're writing about the fans and what we might see tomorrow at this 11 o'clock start against Kansas, potentially in the rain. Is there any reason for fans to get fired up? What kind of crowd are we going to see out there tomorrow morning?
Well, it's sort of impossible to say with any certainty, but I do think that this has a possibility to be one of the worst crowds of the Stoops era because first of all, there's just this tremendous disappointment from what this season was supposed to be. After, like I said, the Sugar Bowl and Trevor Knight's performance and all of that. 3 losses. They've lost their last 2 games at home. The most recent one in particularly embarrassing fashion, at least for the fans. So I think that there's that. There's the weather, like you mentioned. There's a chance it's going to rain. Nobody likes to do that. It's another 11 a.m. kick. I think fans are getting really tired of that, of having to wake up really early to get to these games. And on top of that, it's Kansas, and you know that the game is going to be, well, you're pretty sure that the game is going to be a fairly convincing OU victory. And what are you really going to learn about this team at this point? So I think there's a lot of reasons why the fans are a little bit apathetic right now. And aren't really all that interested in this game tomorrow. But we'll have to wait and see who actually shows up. But I think there's a good chance we could see 10 or 12,000 empty seats tomorrow morning.
Well, before we get back to OSU and Baylor and talk a little bit about the postseason, one last thing for you, Jason, before we turn that page. We know Cody Thomas is going to start at quarterback, no Trevor Knight. What about Sterling Shepard? Is he going to play? Do we have any idea?
The last 2 weeks, I have thought that he was going to play. All indications were that he was going to play. The coaches essentially said he was going to play, and then he gets out there in warm-ups, or as was the case last weekend in Lubbock, he even started the game and realized he just couldn't go. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think anybody could at this point. I think only Sterling really knows where he's at. And I don't think he's going to tell the coaches today that he can't go, because I don't think that I think he wants to try and give it a go, just knowing him. So I would expect that he'll be out there in pregame warm-ups. He might even start the game, and from there we'll just have to see how his groin holds up.
All right, something to watch, obviously, for lots of Sooner fans out there. Let's turn our attention back to Baylor OSU for a second, and Kyle, we'll bring you in here and talk about Baylor. Obviously, Baylor in the mix for the college football playoff, currently number 7. With games remaining after this week at Tech and against Kansas State. A chance to finish strong against a Wildcat team that beat West Virginia at West Virginia last night. So Baylor clearly wants to impress the committee. And, oh, by the way, OSU upset them last year, beat them pretty bad in Stillwater. Is this just the worst case scenario for OSU heading into this game tomorrow?
I mean, it's got to be a bit of a perfect storm with the things you had mentioned. And, going into that OU game, Baylor's quarterback, Bryce Petty, everyone probably knows by now, he basically just deferred every question, said, we're worried about OU. Those comments entering the OSU week definitely weren't as strong, but he was very candid about wanting to beat this team. He went as far as to say that they came in happy against OSU last year, and that's why they lost. They need to right their wrongs, would love to show people Baylor football. So there's a little bit of resentment from some of these past few years, and not even just this last season when OSU put 49 points on them. I mean, we can go all the way back to the RG3 years when Baylor has just always had a tough time against OSU, and this year it's certainly lopsided in the other direction, and they do have a lot to play for. You're right. I'm not sure that a blowout victory against OSU is all that impressive, but at least it shows the committee that Baylor's taking care of its business. It's winning the games easily. I
think we lost Kyle there, got him froze up a little bit. But Mike, we'll turn to you for just a second on this question about Baylor, and might they be ready to try to, put a big number up there on OSU? Is there a chance that maybe they are still playing to get into that college football playoff? We know TCU doesn't have much in the way of tough games left. Could a 70-7 result do something for Baylor, Mike?
Jenny, Barry, Kyle, Jason, has anybody put Mike Lupica on alert? Has anybody do we need to tune in to the sports reporters Sunday morning? 77-zip, Texas A&M, OU, and Bob Stoops was held responsible for that. Is Art Briles going to replace Bob Stoops on Mike Lupica's most unethical college football coach? Barry, you think so? I mean, you said it in the paper, and if that score, what was it, 71-3, Barry?
Well, that's what I said, but that was a little bit of a personal joust at somebody, so that's not meant to be reality. I actually think that running up the score on OSU at some point, it's the law of diminishing returns. You beat OSU 49-7. I think the committee will say that's great. You get north of 63-7. And they will go Lupica on you and say, hey, you're just trying to impress me. And guess what? I'm not all that impressed with browbeating a poor underachieving team like Oklahoma State. So I don't think Art Briles will run it up. But at some point, if you're so inefficient you can't move the ball, some touchdowns just happen without trying. So,
hey, Barry, do we need to educate our younger members of our audience a little bit on this? First of all, Kyle, you were probably in 5th grade when all this happened, so I'm not sure that you were, as tuned in. Oklahoma beats Texas A&M in a Big 12 game. A&M is giving out scholarships, the full complement, and They in fact, Dante Hickson was told not to run hard with the Sooners up big, and A&M came in and tackled him and spiked him. The next day, Mike Lupica on the Sports Reporters goes nuts and says Bob Stoops is running up the score. The second part of that is Jason, who was probably in 7th grade at the time.
No.
Oh no! Well, anyway, I'm just
sophomore
funny.
year.
But here's what. But Jason, let's bring Jason in on this. Jason happens to know that Art Briles has a little, doesn't he, Jason? I mean,
I'm sorry, there was a phone ringing there. I missed that. What'd you say?
You've got some background knowledge on Art Briles that this running up the score, alerting Lupica is really not. It's not out of character for Art Briles.
Yeah, without giving away any names or making any people upset, I have heard that Art Briles, when he was a great high school coach, did have a tendency to run the score up a little bit on the lesser teams that he played. So yeah, I've got that on pretty good authority. So, but again, I hesitate to say much more than that without burning somebody.
Well, Art Briles not playing for a Class 5A in Texas state title. He's potentially playing for a spot in the college football playoff. Let's end this talk about postseason, talking about OU's bowl real quick. Barry, you handicap this on a regular basis on your blog, weekly basis, where the pecking order has fallen for Big 12 teams. Where do you think OU's headed?
I think they're headed to Orlando. If Kansas State had lost last night to West Virginia, I think it was likely that the Sooners were headed to the Alamo Bowl. Now, I think the Alamo's still a possibility, but I think it's more likely Sooners go to the Russell Athletic Bowl and play perhaps the winner of tomorrow's Louisville-Notre Dame game.
Jason, you okay with that? Louisville or Notre Dame in Orlando?
Yeah, there'd be no shortage of good stories to write off of something like that. I mean, and having OU play Notre Dame 3 years in a row would be nothing but cool. At the same time, Barry had really convinced me that we were going to San Antonio, and I'm a little. That's a little bit of a bummer, but maybe we'll still get in. We'll still get to go to San Antonio.
Well, maybe you could just make a trip down there and float down the Riverwalk some night.
Yeah, maybe I could.
What's wrong with that? All right, let's talk real quickly about the big story of the early part of this week, which was Florida needing a new coach. Will Muschamp getting fired on Sunday. And then the names start to percolate, and among them are the two coaches here in state that are the headliners. Obviously, Bob Stoops, Mike Gundy at the top of some lists, some odds makers lists, saying those are the two favorite candidates to get this job. Let's talk about this, guys. Kyle, you've talked to people. You sort of have a sense of things. You heard what Mike Gundy had to say on Monday. Is he, as a candidate, is that realistic at this point?
Well, I think at this point he's got kind of everything that Florida's looking for. He's got the offensive background. There's a good chance he'll be available in early December if they're trying to make a quicker hire, but before some of these other coaches are off of their bowl games. So there is a lot to like there. Whether Gundy's interested or not, it's really anyone's guess. He's a big family guy. He's always references arguments with his wife and how she kind of dictates some decisions. And does the family want to uproot? Do those kids in high school, those Gundy kids, want to move out to Gainesville at this point? I think a lot of it could come back to that. But I think it's really interesting with this Gundy to Florida thing, because if you ask people in this market, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of fans who are going to say, well, why does Mike Gundy deserve that job? He's, they've only won a handful of games this year. But, it's interesting to see kind of the national perspective of Gundy, for him to be high up on these Vegas lists. It shows that people have a lot of respect for what he's done at OSU, and maybe that this season is kind of just seen as a bit of a blip on the radar moving forward. So it really comes down to Gundy's happiness level, and if he is the kind of coach and the kind of person who continues wanting to climb and to go coach in the college football's best conference and with all the resources they have, if he's got that ambition left at this point in his career, I think it's a great opportunity for him. But at the same time, it'd also be pretty hard to imagine him leaving at this point with the reputation he's built and this being his quote unquote Yankees job, as he said when he took it.
Well, obviously a part of this story we're not going to dive into, but this rift that's sort of emerged between Gundy and Boone Pickens, the mega booster for OSU. Boone not endorsing Gundy, if you will, late last week in the Austin American-Statesman. Then Gundy on Monday basically saying, meh, That's okay. I don't need everybody to like me. Definitely interesting stuff going on there. So, and then Jeremy Foley, the Florida athletic director, talking about wanting an offensive coach, offensive-minded. There's sort of some things that lead you to believe maybe Gundy is a high candidate for the Gators. Bob Stoops, I'm sorry, not Mike Stoops. Bob Stoops, obviously connections back to Florida. He was the DC there under Steve Spurrier before he gets the job at OU. Jason, I'll turn to you for just a second. Orlando Sentinel's columnist Mike Bianchi wrote about Bob Stoops yesterday, basically said, it's time to come home. It's time to come back to Florida. You're not appreciated at Oklahoma. Basically wrote a memo to Bob Stoops saying it's time. Is there any validity to that? Any links from Bob Stoops back to Florida this time?
I mean, it's certainly possible. Anything is possible. You know, Bob Stoops came up as a defensive guy. Jeremy Foley said he wanted an offensive guy, but Bob Stoops has been a head coach long enough and had enough offensive success that I don't think that would be an issue or a barrier to him taking that job. I just don't think he's going to take it for a number of reasons. I think, number one, he is not going to go to a place where he has to play his brother every year, and he would. His brother's the head coach of Kentucky. They'd be in the same division. And I don't think he wants any part of that based on his comments after playing Florida State when Mark was defensive coordinator there. He didn't like that at all. He said it was a rotten feeling. Also, you know, Florida right now, their facilities aren't great. They really that's one thing that I don't think people really realize. The SEC has great facilities as a whole, but Florida's right now are not really up to par. They're not even at OU's level, and OU is about to get a huge upgrade in their facilities, and I would think that Bob would want to see that sort of thing through. I think that if Bob was going to go to Florida, he would have gone in 2002. The first time it was offered, and I think that the likelihood of him leaving for that is pretty slim. I've said before, and I still believe he's either going to, if he leaves, it'll be for the NFL, or he'll just retire from OU.
Hey, Barry, in that Orlando Sentinel column, the issue of appreciation and being appreciated was brought up, and Steve Spurrier apparently once said that after about 10 or 12 years at any one job, you probably need to go because you're not going to be appreciated like you should be. Is he right? Because if 10 or 12 years is the mark, we've got a coach at OSU who's been there 10 years and a coach at OU who's been there 16 years.
Well, I mean, I think the 10 to 12 year thing has some legitimacy in general. I do think people tend to get stagnant or get tired you get tired of them, whatever. I'm not saying that fits Stoops. That does work. This idea that Stoops feels underappreciated, I've got a question for you. When has Stoops ever cared about fan appreciation, even when it was the good side? He doesn't care about that stuff. He doesn't listen to the platitudes when he's winning. He doesn't listen to the criticism when he's not. So I think that's a non-issue. That's a non-starter with Stoops. I'm with JK. I don't think he's going to Florida because he doesn't want to play Mark. So Florida State, maybe. Florida, no.
Mike, we'll let you have the last word on this. I don't know if we've got any airplanes incoming from the state of Florida into the state of Oklahoma just yet, but who ultimately is going to coach the Gators in 2015? Is it going to be one of our guys from here in the state or somebody else?
Well, first I'll go piggyback real quick on Barry's comment about appreciation. I think Bob's appreciated to the tune of $5.1 million. That's a lot of appreciation, and this old standard about staying around too long and after a certain number of years, that was true back when these guys were making Barry Switzer salaries. Remember what Barry Switzer's salary was when he was at OU? I think he didn't even make six figures. So, or if he was in six figures, it was barely into it. So that's all hogwash. $5.1 million, that's a lot of appreciation. And if it's not, you can go buy you a bunch of appreciation.
He could have a room of appreciation at that mansion he's got.
He's got a garage of appreciation and a laundry room of appreciation and a sunroom of appreciation. But and here's something you can appreciate. By the way, you can just cross Mike Gundy off the Florida list, and here's how I know. Thayer Evans said so on SportsIllustrated.com. So obviously, if Thayer Evans says that somebody from OSU is not going, I wonder why he would say that, but Thayer Evans says Gundy's not going to Florida, so there you go.
All right.
Cross them off.
He clearly has the insight. Okay, anybody got a guess on who is coaching Florida? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I got one.
Okay.
Jim Harbaugh to Florida.
Interesting. All right. Putting money on that one, Barry?
I don't bet, but anybody that wants to use my information, feel free.
I don't even think Jim Harbaugh is on the Bovada list of favorites, but maybe we can get him put there. Hey, thanks for joining us on our Football Friday Hangout. We went a little overtime, so we appreciate all of our panelists hanging with us and all of you for joining us. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.
Bye, Buster.
He's outside.